Greetings from Clarksville Cumberland Presbyterian Church. I hope that everyone is having a wonderful Holy Week. I am Jimmy Byrd, pastor of the church, and today is Maundy Thursday. This is the Thursday before Easter. This is a Thursday that is very significant to our Christian faith. It's a Thursday that was very important, very bittersweet for Jesus and his disciples. It was a time where Jesus gathered his disciples together to meet in an upper room to celebrate the Passover meal together. So it should have been a time of celebration, a time of excitement with Jesus celebrating this with his closest companions. But it was a night that was filled with heartache, that was filled with frustration, a night that led to one event after another event that led Jesus closer to his arrest and eventually to the cross. As they gathered in that upper room to celebrate the Passover meal, Jesus had two important lessons he wanted to teach to his disciples. The first had to do with two of the elements they were using for the Passover meal, bread and wine. And he tried to help the disciples to understand that the bread would represent his body, the wine would represent his blood. And in doing so, how his body was going to be broken as he was before and on the cross, as he was beaten before he went to the cross and then as he was crucified. The pouring out of the wine would symbolize how his blood would be spilled out leading up to and on the cross. It was very important that disciples understand this because he instructed them to eat of the bread and to drink from the cup and to remember what was going to take place, to remember the sacrifice that he was going to make for them and the sacrifice that he was going to make for us. In Scripture, in Luke chapter 22, it says, "He took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, 'This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' After supper, he took another cup of wine and said, 'This cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood, which is poured out as a sacrifice for you.'" Typically, we gather together on Maundy Thursday and celebrate Holy Communion together. This year, we'll be celebrating Holy Communion together during our Easter Sunday service. It's going to be very special when we do that. For some of you, it may be your first time coming back to church with your church family and actually being here in person. So it's going to be very special to be able to celebrate communion together. That is something that we all, that means so much to all of us and something that we miss when we can't do that together. So we will celebrate that together on Sunday. We'll take the bread and we'll eat it. We'll have the cup that shows the new covenant that Jesus has brought in between God and his people. It reminds us of that night. It reminds us of the sacrifice that Christ made for you and for me. Thanks be to God. Later that evening, after the meal, Jesus did something very unexpected that caught the disciples off guard, even more so than what he had already done by explaining to them about the bread and the wine and what that would represent with his body. Jesus humbled himself and in a way humiliated himself by washing the feet of the disciples. This is not supposed to happen this way. Jesus is their rabbi, their teacher. Jesus is their friend. Jesus is the Son of God. He should not be stooping low enough to wash their feet, but yet he did. Here's what Scripture says. "So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around them. When Jesus came to Simon Peter, Peter said to him, 'Lord, are you going to wash my feet?' And Jesus replied, 'You don't understand now what I'm doing, but someday you will. Peter was horrified that Jesus would stoop down to wash his feet. That was something that Peter just couldn't quite understand, of why his friend, his rabbi, would do something like that. Jesus washed the feet of the disciples to teach them a very important lesson of humility. To teach them that in order for them to spread this good news, to spread this message that they had been going from town to town and region to region, talking about new ways to come to God, new ways to show love and forgiveness and mercy. If they were to continue this, they were going to have to be humble themselves. They were going to have to be servant leaders. The leaders at that time were not that way. The leaders at that time were very elitist. They were very arrogant. And those leaders wouldn't even come near the feet of the common folk. And Jesus is trying to help the disciples understand, if we're going to reach everyone, we have got to be able to humble ourselves. And we've got to be servants as we are leaders. So by Jesus, their rabbi, their teacher, the Son of God, washing their feet, he was showing them that they must go out into the world and do the same. To lower themselves so that they could go out and continue this message of forgiveness and love and mercy. The church here at Clarksville has a little garden outside the building that is very peaceful. And it's a great place to just come and sit and reflect, to pray, to think about life. For Jesus, he and his disciples, after they left the upper room, they went out to a place called the Garden of Gethsemane. And it was a place where Jesus got to his lowest point before going to the cross. It's a place where he separated himself from the rest of the disciples. He went on ahead and he knelt down and he prayed. And he laid it all on the line to God. It's one of the most difficult prayers as we read it in Scripture and hear what Jesus had to say. After he left the disciples for a second time, finding them asleep when they should have been on watch, he goes back to where he was and he prays, "My Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, then your will be done." Jesus knew it was going to be a painful death. He knew he was going to take the sins of all of us when he went to that cross. And the humanity of Jesus was dreading that moment, just like any of us would. You wonder if maybe could Jesus have just ran away? What if he changed his mind and decided this is not how this needs to happen? But it wasn't. He knew what the plan and the will of God was. And so he submitted himself to that plan. And he said, "Not my will, but Father, your will be done." We remember those words of Jesus. We remember the anguish that he went through that night. We struggle with anguish at times, and we wrestle with decisions about what to do. And we lay it on the line to God. "Lord, just give me an answer. Help me to know." And then sometimes we may even eventually say, "Lord, not my will, but your will be done." That's when we truly surrender that decision to God and we truly surrender in faith. I pray that as you've gone through this season of Lent, that God has spoken to you during this time, that God has helped you in an area in your life where you have been struggling and you felt weak. And maybe you're not quite there yet. Well, this Maundy Thursday night reminds us of what Jesus went through. It reminds us the lessons as we remember why his body was broken and his blood was spilled out. We remember how he taught the disciples what it meant to be a servant leader. And then we remember the anguish that he went through in the garden and how he had to say, "Not my will, but your will." Maybe tonight you need to spend some time with God. You need to reflect on these things. Maybe tonight you need to have your own little Garden of Gethsemane spot to go to and just lay it on the line with God and be open and be honest. God already knows. We just got to be able to open up and be honest and let it go. And God's going to hear our prayers. God's going to answer our prayers. But we got to be willing to say, Lord, not my will, but yours be done. I pray that this day is special to you. I pray that on this day you find ways to get closer to God, spending time in Scripture, spending time in prayer. Tomorrow, we will be having our Good Friday service at 6 o'clock at the church. And it's going to be a time of reflection as we hear the Scriptures read about what took place after his arrest. The horrible things that happened to Jesus even before he got to the cross. We remember that he died for us. So hope to see you all tomorrow night. I hope that you have had a blessed day. And may God watch over you and keep you safe until we meet again. God bless.